he remembers very, very vividly his mom gathering up the kids in the living room and saying like, okay, we're going to be quiet because that thing's outside.
Thanks for coming back to Bigfoot Society, your weekly cryptozoology-focused podcast where I talk to a different individual in the cryptozoology field, authors, researchers, artists, all sorts of people. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please go ahead, subscribe to this podcast and rate us 5 stars, as it helps us get more into the podcast stratosphere and get better guests on the show. Also, if you're on YouTube, do us a favor, like this video and subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost a thing, and it helps us get out there into the YouTube stratosphere as well. Be sure to leave what your favorite part of the episode was in the comment. Welcome back to another episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. This week I have the privilege of talking with John Hickenbottom, naturalist from Salt Fork State Park. This is an interesting conversation about what it's like to work and to educate in a place that is so heavily focused on Bigfoot. And the eye of the Bigfoot community is definitely on Salt Fork. John has such an interesting viewpoint, being an educator, a naturalist, and we go through his journey from not really being into Bigfoot to maybe it turning into something else for him. You'll enjoy this chat I had with John, so sit back, relax, as I talk with John Hickenbottom, naturalist at Salt Fork State Park in beautiful, wooded Ohio. I've got a new friend with me, John Hickenbottom. How's it going?
It's going great. How about yourself?
Oh man, it's doing good. I'm ready to hang out on in the weekend and have a great holiday weekend. And let's start out with doing a little background about yourself, John,
Okay.
because some people may say, man, I've heard the name, but I'm not quite sure where, because you're in some articles. I think you've had maybe an interview or two, but once people hear about your background, they'll be like, oh, I get it. Okay, so let's see. John Hickenbottom is a naturalist and outdoors person with a lifelong interest in wildlife and the natural world. Born and raised in Southeast Ohio, John has worked for a number of agencies as an educator and interpretive naturalist, and is currently the naturalist at Salt Fork State Park in Ohio. His interest in Bigfoot was cultivated after years of listening to the stories park visitors had to tell about encounters and experiences they've had. While not a Bigfoot researcher per se, he considers himself a Bigfoot educator, which I think is very cool. He lives on a farm, awesome, with his wife and 3 children outside of Cambridge, Ohio. All right. Well, that, my friend, is cool stuff. And I want to start out right off the bat. So what is, when you have to explain that you're a naturalist, how are you explaining that?
Yeah. So I usually get so working for a state park, a lot of people think that I'm a park ranger, which I'm not. I have no badge, no gun, no measurable authority. So I, as a naturalist, I'm kind of the public interface with park visitors, if that makes sense. So I do all of the biological surveys and stuff, but I also do all of the public education. So whether we're talking about like boating, canoeing, recreation, that sort of thing, or wildflower hikes. I've got a wildflower hike coming up next week. Okay. So things like that. And normally, so my background is in reptiles and amphibians. I'm a snake guy. That was my background originally. That's kind of why I got into this. Why I got into being a naturalist is to teach people about snakes. You know, it gave me an excuse to go out and catch and play with snakes and stuff. So,
okay, cool.
So I got into that. I went to college for natural resources. I went to college here in Ohio. And then I kind of worked all over the state, wherever work took me. And that's interpretive naturalist. So that's kind of a confusing term. An interpreter is, normally we think of interpreting language, But the way an interpreter works, at least in this context, is we take complex ecological ideas or complex,
Okay.
um, different concepts out and to do with the natural world, and we break it down into sort of digestible pieces that the public can take home with them after they're done visiting the park on vacation,
Okay.
that sort of thing. So I didn't, I mean, I grew up here. I grew up about 12 miles from Salt Fork, and hunted and fished in Salt Fork my whole life. So I kind of grew up with the whole grassman thing,
Yeah.
especially right when it peaked. I was in high school, sort of when it was really gaining a lot of steam. But being local, it was, I didn't really take it that seriously. You know what I mean? It was kind of a joke, especially amongst the people that use the public land all the time. If you hadn't seen something, you sort of didn't take it seriously. You know what I mean?
You weren't cool. Yeah.
No, yeah, like we didn't, so when I got to Salt Fork, so I've kind of worked at Salt Fork in two different capacities.
Okay.
I'd started there in 2012 and worked 2012, 2013, and then left for another park and then transferred back to Salt Fork in 2016. When I was there the first time, I did two sort of, it was just one summer, and then the next summer I did two kind of one-off Bigfoot programs, and it really was just playing to a crowd. I figured I'll slap Bigfoot on this, people will show up, and I can talk about other stuff too.
You're
You know
just
what I
filling
mean?
the seats. You were
Right?
like,
Yeah,
I'll
that was
get them, and then I'll get them.
yeah, and that was kind of my plan. So I did these two
Right.
one-off programs, and then I left. And actually, the person that kind of was in between my two, stints at Salt Fork, started a Bigfoot Hike. She kind of farmed it out kind of farmed it out to the researchers that were in the area. So we sort of began hosting a Bigfoot Hike. When I came back, I was like, oh man, we could, this is fine. They can do their thing. Here's one thing that I kind of run into with all of this stuff.
Okay.
I was really dismissive about the Bigfoot thing to begin with.
So you're not a believer.
No.
Okay.
I'm getting to that. This is one of those things where you're like not allowed to change your opinion ever. Like that's sort of the thing where it's like, sue me. I changed my opinion. Like after, I was like, wait, and you have to look at it from my perspective too. Like I went to school. I was passionate about all of this stuff that I know,
Sure.
and I was at this beautiful park. I mean, Salt Fork is the biggest park in Ohio, the biggest state park in Ohio. So I was at this beautiful park with all these beautiful resources. And then like 80% of the time I was talking about Bigfoot, you know what I mean? And I never got an outlet to share all this stuff. So I was really dismissive at first. And I tell everybody when they point out, actually I catch some stuff from some of the researchers around our area where it's like, oh, you used to hate us. And I'm like, I never hated you. I was just kind of dismissive, it was never I never, I was just dismissive about it, and I changed my opinion. Like I can change, you can change your mind, so I was really dismissive about it at first. And then, cause I was looking at it and the categories of people that I was dealing with.
Okay.
You had people who were, for the most part, storytellers. You know what I mean? There was one demographic that they were storytellers who maybe they led kind of a boring life, and the Bigfoot thing sort of spiced it up. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
And then you had people who maybe had a actual like psychotic episode, and maybe the reality break there was not, they were seeing some. But the people that really started to sway me, where I became much less dismissive, were the people who had no skin in the Bigfoot game.
Yes.
Yes. That's what really started to sway me. And when I say sway, I don't mean, I became like a knower, or a believer. And the whole thing, I'll kind of get to it. The whole concept of belief with this sort of thing. I usually don't use the term believer, because, well, I'll get to it. But the people who had no skin in the Bigfoot game, the hunters and fishermen who they saw something that altered their perception of reality. You know what I mean? They knew what was out in the woods until a specific day. And then now, they're not sure, they're not like, those were the people that interested me. And those stories kept coming up and coming up. Also, I started looking at it a little differently. I have to admit, I had kind of a snooty attitude about it, to begin with, because it was like, oh, come on, but then I started really thinking about it. I'm like, man, I saw a bobcat probably in 2001. So I was like a kid, and everyone dismissed that I saw a bobcat. Now a bobcat's not like a mountain lion; it's a little cat.
He's a little guy, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little cat. But everyone dismissed that I saw this thing.
Okay.
And well, now you fast forward to 2022. Our county last year had more recorded sightings of bobcats than any other county.
Oh, really? Wow.
So chances are they've been here for that long. I just lucked into seeing one. And everybody, like, no one believed me. So I started thinking of it like that, and one thing that kind of stuck with me was like, if you asked me to come out to your property and say, I don't know, I think I've got bear, or I think there's badger out here, but I don't know. I'd look around and I'd say, wow, so you have the habitat for it. So I'm going to go for a walk and see what evidence I can find. There's definitely habitat. There's a field over there that has rodents, and there's plenty of woodlands and things like that. And, I might go into the woods and, oh, wow, there are bear prints, there are tracks. Okay. There's a little fur stuck to a tree, so I might not lay eyes on a bear or on a badger or something, but I can go back and tell you, like, yep, you got them, they're on your property. And that works for basically everything but the Bigfoot thing. Okay. Like when you're on like the snooty attitude side of it, it's like, well, all of the evidence, where's the body, that sort of thing. Oh, well, it's like, well, when you have people who are collecting all this different evidence, it's like, there's got to be something to that, right? You've got all this, like, and what I tell people at the park all the time is like, we have a really good print. Maybe I'll send you a picture of it. Oh, yeah. That I didn't collect it or anything. This was collected, I think, in 2011. Okay. But it's one of those things where people will look at it, look at the replica that I have at the nature center, and they'll say, is this real? And I'm like, well, so I can tell you it's not fake, or we didn't fake it. I said, we didn't fake it. I said, so it's one of two options. It's either it is real, or it is faked and we don't know it. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where I wasn't there, and I can't, like, without a shadow of a doubt tell you, like, no one absolutely, but it was collected. Wow. I sort of trust the people who found it. So it's something, you know what I mean? Now, that's not me saying like it's out there. That's what it's like a lot of this stuff, and I've seen footprints, I've seen the blob footprints that people will take plaster casts of. And it's like,
exactly. Yeah. And you're
like, I don't know. Yeah. And like, oh, it's interesting. I guess it kind of has but really it could just sort of be where some snow melted in a weird way and sort of indented the ground. You know what I mean? Or bears do this interesting thing where the footprint of their front paw will be obscured by the footprint of their back paw, and it'll make this 14 or 15-inch bear print, and we do have bears. It's not like the Smokies or anything where they're hanging out downtown, but we do have them around. They're relatively reclusive. So I've seen footprints like that, but then there are other ones where I'm like, well, it's either faked or it's not. That's like, like, I don't know how to explain it other than that. Now, I mentioned that I don't really use the term believer because it's right. And not that I'm not to bash any of the paranormal stuff, you know what I mean? But like, because I'm comfortable with the nuts and bolts, flesh and blood, animal, relic hominoid sort of theory, you know what I mean? Hypothesis. Oh yeah. Because I deal with animals every day, you know what I mean? I deal with the natural world every day. So that's sort of in my wheelhouse. Like, this thing eats, sleeps, mates, needs to have shelter, needs to have food, that sort of thing, So I'm kind of going with what I know when it comes to this stuff. And the idea of like belief, to me, the connotations are sort of, like, science doesn't really function on belief. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't, science is no matter whether you believe or not, and I think 2020 showed us that. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, science is no matter if you believe or not, So experiencing things, that's, we have five senses. So you can experience a lot of things, and be empirical about it. So I don't usually run into the belief thing. Like I'm like a healthy skeptic, but I've lost so much of the cynical side
Mm.
of that, so like now, so much of that, I've talked to so many people, and this has sort of evolved into something that I really wasn't prepared for when I kind of dipped
Yeah.
my toes into it,
Yeah.
that I've lost all, like, I'm skeptical, but on the side of, uh, you know, this is, there's something to this, and I don't know what it is,
Mm.
and I'd like to keep an open mind about it. Now, getting into my like personal beliefs and stuff, I totally
Okay.
think it could happen, well, and that kind of depends on the day that you talk to me. Like some days I wake up and I'm like, oh, 100%, you could hide a
Yep.
mammoth out here. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so thick and rugged and everything out here. I mean, just on our place, we've got 20 acres. And just on our place, like there's so many places,
Yeah.
out here. And, and then other days I wake up and I'm like, man, I just don't know. I don't know how I, feel about it. But the way I've always looked at it, like in my capacity, as naturalist and as an educate, we're kind of the education arm of the ODNR. That's kind of my job, is as like the educational arm. And there's lots of us all over the state, and we all use the resources that are around us.
Mm.
I'm not going to do a program about a lighthouse because I don't have a
Right.
lighthouse on my, you know what I mean?
Exactly. It wouldn't make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Um, my beliefs aside, the reason why I say the educator thing is because, I mean, this is something that I would, we can't, like, I can't really in good conscience ignore it at the
Mm.
park. You know what I mean? Like, I've got people telling me things all the time, here, like I
I
heard
like that.
this, so it would be, I would not be doing a good, it would be doing a disservice to the public if I didn't, embrace this.
Yeah.
And I'm treating it like I would treat anything else. You know what I mean? Anything else that I'm educating on, whether I'm doing a canoe program or a program about raccoons or a program, you know what I mean? That's
I
how I'm
get it.
treated. That's how I treat these things.
Mm.
So I don't, I spend so much more time out in the woods looking for salamanders and things like that than I do looking for Bigfoot,
Yep.
That's why I hate to say that, because like I really try to get out and do things. And our researchers around here are so great and so welcoming. And I go out with them whenever possible. But, I spend so much more time out looking for, snakes and salamanders and stuff than I do. But that's why I always say I'm not really a researcher. I mean, I do a lot of I mean, probably 90% of what I read now is Bigfoot stuff at this point, because that's kind of where I'm at. This has kind of grown into something. So I'm trying to keep up on everything. And I listen to, your podcast and
Thank you.
quite a few other
Yeah.
podcasts on the subject. So and it has changed my mind
Mm.
about what I personally think, but embracing it as from an educational standpoint is also really, really great. What I always tell people is like, you know, my wildflower hike, it will be a good year if I get 40 people,
Okay.
to show up for it. That'll be like a, excellent year. 40 people to a wildflower hike. Night hikes are always popular. I can go out and call owls and stuff. They're always really popular. But,
Mm.
in this job, if I do a moth program or even a salamander program,
Right. Yep.
I'm going to get salamander people. I'm going to get moth people,
Sure.
you know, um, and you're kind of, it's the kind of the lowest impact of education you can do, because you're like literally preaching to the choir. It's sort of like the lowest impact that I can have. But if we do a Bigfoot program at the park,
Okay.
the demographic is so diverse that there is no demographic. You know what I mean?
It's
Like, it's
everyone.
literally everyone comes to it. I mean, when
Wow.
we because of COVID and stuff, we didn't do any programming during 2020
Okay.
at
Yep.
all. No public programming, so it was all virtual. And I'll kind of touch on that here in a bit, because that's sort of what snowballed into all this stuff, the virtual side of things. But June 2021, the first Bigfoot hike we had 300 people show up to it,
No
over 300
way.
people.
300.
Yeah, I mean, so
Wow.
I had to call our LE guys like to do traffic, because
Oh
the
my
parking lot was full.
goodness.
I've never had to do that for, a
Oh,
bug program.
yeah.
So that's not just Bigfoot people. Of course, Bigfoot researchers and stuff show up,
Mhm.
and it's a great place to exchange ideas on the subject,
Oh, yeah.
But I also get, I got the frat boys who are down here for a weekend and kind of
Really?
doing, and then like families who are like, oh, there's a
Yeah.
Bigfoot thing. This is the show with the tall guy on it. He does the, and
Yeah, yeah. The promo.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
They'll come to it. And then we get like people, the thing that fascinates me is people will come to it and they'll say like, we saw this and I've never told anybody about this, but you guys are doing
Oh,
this program, and
yes.
they'll share some story. So it's really interesting. But on the flip side of that, the sort of non Bigfoot side of it, I can also shoehorn so much education on the
Oh,
natural world into something like that. If we're looking at it like it is a flesh and blood animal,
mhm.
uh, then it has to conform to all the laws of like ecology and nature. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So all of those principles apply to coyotes and owls and everything else. The trail that we do these hikes on, generally, it's pretty cool. It's a trail we find like glow in the dark fungus on,
Oh,
which is
cool.
pretty
Yeah.
cool. But so it's kind of a two-sided thing. Now, I used to not be very involved in the big, like I said, I was kind of dismissive about it, and I've totally changed my opinion on that, on the whole subject. Um, and what sort of happened was it was multiple things. So I got a couple of years working with the researchers under my belt. I talked to these guys. I talked to people who, I'd go home at night and I'm like, man, I just don't know. Like, I don't know how to feel about this person's story. This
Yeah.
person told me this story, and it just seems like if they saw an upright bear, it wouldn't have like shaken them so bad. So I got all these stories that I'd hear over the summer, and then I'd work with the researchers. So we started doing, not having any programming during 2020. I think it was October 2020. I was asked to do like a webinar because everybody went virtual,
Oh, yeah, of course. Yep.
and so it was kind of part of our Halloween series. I was asked to do a webinar on Bigfoot in the area, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll totally do it. I got good resources. I'll talk to the researchers, and I'll put something together that'll really, hopefully help. Like people will enjoy it. And so I put together this. I wanted to take a telescopic approach. So start big and funnel down to like right into our backyard. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like right
yeah,
here into
okay,
Salt. So
okay.
I sort of took like, oh, here are some like big, bipedal animals in folklore from all around the world,
Nice,
kind of
nice.
glazed over it. Tried to touch on stuff, brought it down to North America, talked about Patty. I will say that the everyone always asks how much kickback I get, like what sort of, fallout being like the Bigfoot naturalist has.
Like
The
day 1,
the
yeah.
the most kickback I've ever got from it has been, I was talking like really fast. I was excited, and I'm talking to
Okay.
the camera really fast by myself. I can't. The platform that we used at the time, I couldn't like interact with anyone. We had someone else remotely interacting with the people on the chat.
Oh,
So
weird.
I'm like talking real fast, and I mixed up Patterson and Gimlin,
Oh,
and
jeez.
and I said
Yeah.
one was, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
just an accident, just slipped up, and mix them up, and that's the kickback that I got. That's people
And
still bring it
they're
up.
all over it.
People still bring it up.
Adam. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
But anyway, so I did that. Got it right down to salt pork, everything.
Mhm.
And man, it was so popular. It was so people loved it, and people
Mm.
started coming to me to talk about this stuff. So I did another series. I did like a 4-part series that
Yeah.
spring, and those were incredibly popular. And those, like, I researched them much more thoroughly as best I could. There were little corrections here and there, but you always get, I mean, you know, you always get miss things. But I researched them much more thoroughly. I mean, to the point where I told my wife at one point, I was like, man, I think if you turned out the lights right now, the Patterson Gimlin film would project out of my eyes onto the wall. That was, I
Yeah.
was like, that's how it was. And I'm kind of still there. And some interesting things happened. You know, I got in touch with a lot more researchers. We were
Okay.
talking a little bit before the show started. I said I was my buddy Micah.
Yeah.
This was an interesting thing. I got a public records request, first one I've ever had to deal with.
Ooh,
You
what's
know,
that?
it's like a FOIA request, just
Oh, really?
But I
Okay.
got it, and I got kind of kicked down to me, and they're
Ooh.
like, "This is a Bigfoot thing. Can you do what you want? Like
You're the
look at
guy,
this."
do what you
And
do.
which is kind of cool,
Okay, yeah, that
like
is
I was
cool.
like, oh, I'm like the X Files, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, this
you
is great.
are. Yeah.
And I read through it, and I'm like, all right, well, I said, I've got any email that I have is mostly like, hey, Bigfoot hike's still on for May, whatever,
Okay.
nothing in depth. And then all my presentations that I'd done that spring, and then I read, like, the sign off, and it was like, oh, my guy. I'm like, I know him. I listen to his
Oh, that's
podcast.
cool.
So
That's
I
so cool.
called him up, and I got to know those guys that do the guys that do the Sasquatch tracks
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
podcast. I got to know
Yeah.
them real well. A
Oh, that's
couple of them
cool.
a couple of them are coming up here
Nice.
they're actually going to help me at the conference that's coming up. We've got the Ohio Bigfoot
Yeah,
conference is
yeah, yeah.
coming up on the 30th. So they're actually going to help me out with that,
Wow.
help me staff the table and stuff. I got them set up as volunteers.
Nice.
So yeah, it's kind of fun because we also talk about other stuff too, like we
Right,
talk
right.
about, but so I got to know them, and I got to meet so many people in this, so many people who, like myself, maybe weren't 100%, hadn't had an
Mhm.
experience. And I'll kind of get to my experiences. I don't have anything that's like a smoking gun.
I was gonna
But
ask you. Yeah,
yeah, people, and that's like the number one question that I
I'm
get,
sure.
probably outside of
I'm
like,
sure.
where's the restroom at, is, have you ever seen it? Um, but so, I talked to so many people about it. And the sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But yeah, the experiences and the number of things, kind of, it turned into something else. Like, this is sort of what I do now. And that's why I do the Bigfoot
That's
educator thing. Cause it's
awesome.
like, if I were, when I'm doing canoeing, I'm a watercraft educator. You know what I
Right.
mean? When I'm doing, anything else. So this is the Bigfoot educator is kind of where it's at. And that like, it's been really great. There aren't as many. I don't know of any other communities that are quite as welcoming as like the Bigfoot community. I mean,
Yeah.
infighting and stuff aside, like that's why I haven't. That's why I
Right.
haven't really joined any like
Yep.
groups. Is
No,
because
I got you. I
I
got
prefer
you.
to just
Yep.
not bother with the infighting. That's not what interests me. Like, the politics of Bigfoot is not what interests me. You know what I mean? Um,
Exactly.
I'm more interested in the citizen science that's being
Mm.
done, because there is a lot of really good citizen science
Oh, there
that's
is
being
so
done.
much. Yeah.
People are doing, like, people like Matt Pruitt, those guys are doing such good actual scientific, and using the scientific method kind of properly, not using
Mm.
the scientific method to sort of, you know, there's like their confirmation bias, or any sort of, like, to validate any opinions
For
that they
sure.
have about it. You know what I mean? Like, they're actually using, you know, those guys like Shane Corson and the Olympic Project.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
guys are the
So good.
science that they're at, like the science that they're doing is just great. And I like that, in this, like, I think it's starting to gain some traction, as far as, just, if nothing else, people appreciating that they're doing science. And the
Mm.
cool thing about science is sometimes you're proven wrong. You know what I mean?
And that's
So
part
if
of learning. Yeah.
that's part of it.
Yeah.
So if it comes out that they're, this is all for naught, well, that's how science works.
Yep.
What I also always say is, like, it would be earth shattering for a minute, if if you went on a hike tomorrow and discovered a Bigfoot body and brought it to the Smithsonian, it would
Wouldn't
be
that well,
it
it'd
would be.
disappear though.
Yeah, yeah. It would be earth shattering for a minute, but
Yeah.
3 years, it would be another giraffe. If you think about a giraffe,
Oh,
a,
yeah.
a giraffe looks
Yeah.
like something that a third grader designed. You know what I mean? How much of an improbable animal is that? It's got that long neck, the kind of goofy horns on its head. It bumbles
It's
around.
weird. It's a
It's
weird one.
but every kindergartner perfectly comfortable with the existence of a giraffe and
Mhm.
doesn't care that much about it. You know what I mean? Like there might be somebody that the giraffe is their animal, but you know what I mean? They don't think giraffe every day. So,
Yeah.
3 years, it would be another giraffe. You know what
It's
I
so
mean?
weird to think like
Yeah, but
you're
you
right,
think
yeah.
about
In a few years, the
yeah,
society
it
would be
would
fine with it.
yeah. So I look at it like any other animal. The
Mm.
ivory-billed woodpecker.
Yeah.
I've seen it vacillate from. There's an article out like just this week saying
Yep. Yep.
maybe it's not extinct. I think 2 years ago they came out and said probably extinct. You know what I mean? So things like that happen. So I don't know. So all of that, the citizen science and all of that kind of changed my opinion on it. Now, as far
Mm.
as my experiences, everyone always asks, "Have I ever seen a Bigfoot?"
Of
And I have
course.
not. I
Okay.
have not. And part of the reason why I go out and look for salamanders and snakes and stuff instead of Bigfoot is because I always figure my chances are greater
They
seeing
probably
him.
are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Seeing him if I'm not out actively looking for, you know what I mean? I always see way more deer when I'm not hunting, you know what I mean? All the time. So I always think, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I keep an ear out for, a twig breaking somewhere. But I did have, and this was actually it was recorded for one of the webinars that I did.
Okay.
I had a tree knock. Now,
Oh,
and an unsolicited tree knock. Okay,
which
not
is
not
huge.
one that like yeah. I was actually in the middle of talking. I was kind of rambling on about something because one of the webinars that I did, I wanted to do sort of a video, a live feed, not really a live feed, but like a pre-recorded thing. So I went out and camped out, called some owls, set up some trail
Okay.
cameras, and pre-recorded this thing. So I had my camera set up, or I had my iPad set up next to my campfire, and I was talking about something. You can see my camp in the background and stuff. And in the middle of me talking, you got that home run, like,
Wow.
and it sounded like it was, 10, 15 yards into the woods. Uh, and I like froze and sort of just stared off into the woods for a few, you know, and I heard nothing else. Everything went quiet. But it was that, and I was there, like I could hear, it was so clear that pop,
Mm.
and I couldn't I couldn't. It wasn't a woodpecker. It wasn't an acorn fall. This was in March, so it wasn't
Yeah.
like a walnut falling out of a tree. And I'm like, man, it's not even that cold. It wasn't ice popping.
Okay.
And I'm like, I just don't know what that was. And I was so happy that I got it recorded.
Wow.
And I showed it to researchers, and I'm like, this is what I got. Now, smoking gun? No, you know what I mean? But I heard something. I heard actually before I did any of the webinars or anything like that, kind of right when I was getting into some of the Bigfoot stuff,
Mhm.
more involved and more active in the stuff. I did have a little bit of an experience with my wife.
Oh,
We now this we were actually out squirrel hunting because we were dating at the time, and
okay.
this is Appalachia, so that's how you date.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I'm down.
So I took her out, and we heard this sort of growly howl that sort of
Ooh,
echoed through the woods,
okay.
and this was in the wildlife area around Salt Fork.
Okay.
And she asked me, and she's like, "What is that?" And I'm like, I don't know, but we
Oh,
got to be
man.
quiet because we're hunting and stuff. So we got into the car, and she was like YouTubing things on the way home. Is it a coyote sound? What
Okay.
is it? And I said, hey, just for fun, I said, listen to the Ohio howl.
Oh my.
And I said, Google, YouTube the Ohio Howl and just listen to that, whatever the soundbite is. And she was like, oh, that sounds a lot like it. What? And I said, well, that's like, that's an alleged Bigfoot vocalization that was recorded here in Ohio. And I said, it's been recorded other places. So now it's kind of generically called the Ohio Howl, an Ohio Howl, and I like, I told her, I said, I don't know, is it like, what did we hear? Wasn't a coyote. I'm pretty good at animal noises, and that one puzzled me. Now I've never had anything just pop out of the woods and, scare me. I've never had anything weird. Everyone has those moments when there's, everyone has those moments when there's like the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
Right.
So I've had plenty of those where I'm like, man, I just don't, I'm not feeling good. I
Yeah.
just don't feel, I've had plenty of those, but I think, I think it's like with anything, you have to kind of be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place, I guess, if you look at it, that way, if you don't want to find something like that.
Yeah. There's some people that probably don't want to find it out there, but
so I get, but as far as the stories at Salt Fork go,
yes.
I get told so many different things through the summer, and some of them are really fun. Like some of them are, second or third hand even. It's my,
wow.
my grandma in West Virginia used to tell us the story from when she was a kid. And I always remembered it because, they didn't call it Bigfoot back then. But, I talked to a gentleman, and this one I can talk about because he kind of gave me permission to tell people about it,
Yeah. That's great.
So I don't have any like formal recording system as far as
I was going to ask you, are you like writing down? Or...
I do. I write them down for my own purposes.
That's awesome.
And then actually I have a map that you can put pins in if you've had them. And if you're willing to write it down, there's like, I've got a composition notebook there, and people will occasionally write down their whole story, so
that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun, it's definitely a draw. But again, like being a public thing, you got to take that with a grain of salt. Like who's writing down, BS and who's writing down something that they actually experienced.
Yeah.
But you can kind of tell which ones which ones were made up. The elaborations of a bad liar. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of tell which ones are, you can kind of tell which ones are made up. But I talked to a gentleman who had been walking around the park in the middle of winter, with his sister, and they found this basically a trackway, and he didn't even really think about it. He started following along, then it clicked, like, what in the heck am I looking at? What in the heck are these? So he took pictures of them, and pretty good pictures. He had a pocket knife that he set down in the track.
Nice.
And for size, which is something people sometimes don't do. I'll get a track that's in the mud, and I'm like, is this 6 inches long or 16 inches long? Like I can't. But he took pictures of the whole thing, and so it kind of stuck with him, and he came back to the same location just a little later in the year out of curiosity, and what they basically did was they had a digital point and shoot, and without picking anything in particular, he was just sort of clicking it and like kind of walking, and got kind of a blob squatch, in one of the pictures. Like there's definitely a vaguely humanoid shape, and it's like, I don't know, but it affected him so much. He never thought about Bigfoot prior to this, and it affected him so much. So his job, he's an artist by trade. And he would restore, he would actually take, like a blurry Civil War tintype or daguerreotype picture, where like facial features maybe weren't weren't very detailed. He would take those, and based on measurements that he'd do, he would make sort of a composite of what the person kind of looked like. And he actually focused mostly, this is you want to talk about a niche market. He would actually use, he would sort of do dogs from Civil War photos. So
Okay.
any dogs that were, he would do art around that. Like he would draw this dog and that was what he did. It was kind of basically dog art, but he was a phenomenal artist. I mean,
Super neat.
uh, yeah, I know, but phenomenal artist.
Yeah.
So it stuck with him so much that he decided to go home and take a still from the Patterson Gimlin film
Okay.
and do the same thing, that same
Oh,
process
wow.
for
Cool.
that, and gave me a print of the
Oh,
the face. And I keep it above my desk, like she kind of stares at me all day long, I've got it framed. So that one stuck with me because I'm like, here's a guy who I think he's in his 60s.
okay.
Here's a guy in his 60s who never thought about Bigfoot, and now here he is drawing Patty's
Which
face,
is
and
boom.
he just
Yeah.
stopped in a couple of weeks ago and said hi to me and like hung out for a few and told me,
Oh,
he's like,
that is
I'm
cool.
working. He said, I didn't really like her nose. I looked at another still, and I think I'm going to redo the nose. So I'm doing another, and I'm like, man, so this guy, it altered the way he looked at reality,
Big time.
like, so that one fascinated me. I talked to another family. I won't get into like specifics because
Yeah,
I got,
sure.
but I talked to another family where the guy, it was kind of hard for him to talk about.
Okay.
But he told his wife kind of prompted him to tell me the story of
Mm.
when he was young in Southern Ohio. They lived in basically like a trailer,
Okay.
and he remembers very, very vividly his mom gathering up the kids in the living room and saying like, okay, we're going to be quiet because that thing's outside,
No
you
way.
know? Yeah.
Whoa.
And I'm like, whoa, man, talk
That's
about
wild,
like
dude.
gives you the creeps,
Yeah.
and he said he remembers hearing like, something brush against the side of the trailer and stuff. And he said, and he's like, yeah, you're a kid. You don't really think about it. Like you might think your parents are losing it, but you don't really think about it. And he's like, then I get older and we start hearing about Bigfoot. And I'm like, man,
Yeah.
that's the thing, that they talked about. So those are two that really stuck. And what got me was like, they came in and started talking to me, and his wife's like, you should tell him, you should tell him.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, do you have it? And that's usually how I greet people is like, oh, did you have an experience? Did you see something? And I'll listen to their story. And sometimes that bites you in the butt. Like that's, oh, did you hear something? And then it's like this convoluted, like crazy, story. But then other times it's like this, where it's like this, really intimate. And I almost felt wrong listening to it because I was like, oh
Oh,
man,
man.
this is like, you're like, I don't know what I would have, and to carry that around every day,
Wow.
you're carrying that around. So that one really stuck with me, that him talking about his mom, like gathering them up inside and saying, oh, that thing's out there. It wasn't, there's a Bigfoot, there's a Sasquatch. It's just that thing's
That
out there,
thing, it's something. If you go
and I'm like,
outside,
oh
that's the last
man.
thing you do.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
like, that one stuck with me. Now we've got pretty memorable stories around the park that kind of get circulated all through. I mean, if you watch any of the shows that have come to Salt Fork, you're pretty familiar with, you'll very quickly find, those stories. And some of them, like I said, they've been hashed over so many times that
Sure.
I don't go into them as much. But the things that I do get, I get people in offhanded things too. Oh yeah, we were out night fishing and somebody threw a rock at us,
Oh, man,
and
you're
it's like,
tell me more.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but stuff like that where it's not necessarily, they don't start out with, oh, it was,
Right.
100% a Bigfoot. Now I usually try to keep like my opinions about stuff out of it. If I'm usually, and I usually try to like not, I don't, I just don't, it's not that I don't believe, I talked a little bit about that belief.
Right. Right.
You know, I collect it all and I try to compartmentalize it into this is my Bigfoot education box. You know what I
Super
mean?
cool. Yeah.
And this is what I keep all of this stuff in, including all the stuff that I've experienced, you know. But whether I never say, is it real? Because I'm like this, when it comes to something like this, it's such a personal thing
Mm,
that real is
true.
almost subjective. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
Like what I always say is I'm like, is it real in that you can go to a museum or a nature center somewhere and see a body, see bones? Is
Mm.
it real in that? Well, by that definition, if you're being strict about that definition, no. you know if you're being strict about that definition, can you go someplace and see like that is the bones to a Bigfoot? If you mean, is it real in that I can wear this shirt or put a
Hmm.
bumper sticker on my car and go
Right.
anywhere in the country and people will recognize it as Bigfoot?
They'll know.
100%. You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean? Like it
Oh
is
yeah.
part of part of our collective unconscious.
It's weird, man.
Yeah, I know, but it's true.
Yeah, it is.
Like car insurance, beef jerky, you can go to our gift shop and buy a
I'm
Bigfoot plushie.
sure
You know what I mean?
you've got an awesome
Huh?
gift shop. It's so
Yeah.
funny.
And basically every carry out for 30 miles from here too.
Mm.
But yeah, so is it real in that? Yeah, it's like part of our culture. And when we're talking, there are things in our culture that we have an 1840s farmhouse, a stone farmhouse on
Okay.
our like on the park. We do programs around that. It's part of the local culture. You know what I mean? Like it has to do with the local history. It has to do with the local land. It has to do with everything. All of that stuff's tied together. Well,
Hmm.
Bigfoot is tied right in there with it. It's part of our local culture. It's part of our, really now at this point because of the internet and things, it's part of our global culture.
For sure.
But you start getting to like you can't wear a Loveland Frog shirt and go someplace and have like it takes a special person to go, oh yeah, Loveland Frog.
That's true. I have to
But
remind
Bigfoot,
myself of that. Yeah.
right? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the Loveland Frog's kind of one of our like my kids all have sort of their chosen cryptids, and the Loveland Frog's one of
Oh,
my
that's
daughter.
theirs.
That's
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's one of theirs, and
That
then
is
my
cool.
other daughter's the Fresno Nightcrawlers.
Oh, that's a
That's
classic one.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So
Yep.
we got, but and then Bigfoot, of course. Like
Oh
that's
yeah.
I kind of got the market cornered on
Of
Bigfoot here,
course.
in our household. But yeah. So I mean, it gets weird. I get people that get really hung up on the whole, oh, you work, you like they get hung up on my job. Like, how are they letting me talk about it? And they don't really
That's wild.
grasp. They
Really?
don't really, yeah, and they don't really grasp like what I'm doing, like the education side of it. You know what I mean? This
Yeah.
isn't like I'm educating people about this. You know what I mean? And that's not a thing like this. Even just talking to you, like I'm promoting the park. I'm promoting our
Oh, totally.
programs.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's kind of how I approach all of this, and I approach it like I would approach any other thing. Now the research, it's pretty hard to research this, because you got to wade through so much,
You
and
do.
you have to kind of pick what camp you're in. That's what one thing that kind of drives me nuts is I got to kind of pick what camp I'm in
Woo
to
versus
as
flesh and blood.
versus,
All of
you know
that.
what I mean. But I also want to like I don't want to. I'm not disrespecting anybody that
Oh yeah, totally.
like because the cool thing about science, if we found out that portals open up and big hairy bipedal apes walk out of them,
Yeah.
it would turn on a dime, and
Oh,
that
totally.
science would, I don't know what the chances of that happening are, you know what I mean? But that's kind of how science and stuff works. Um, so I no disrespect to that, and like I said, I try to stay out of the infighting and stuff. Like I don't get involved in any of that if I can help it. I it's counterproductive to any goal that we might have. And ultimately, my goal is not proving existence. It's not, anything. I'm creating a dialogue with a welcoming group of people. Like the Bigfoot community has just been excellent to me. You know what I mean? Like they've been so welcoming and stuff. So we create this sort of public dialogue where everybody can be involved. Uh, it's an exercise in critical thinking, regardless of where you fall on it. And I always tell people who completely dismiss it, like if people show up to anything that I do
Mm.
and they're like, this is such nonsense, this is such, and they just kind of want to be a sort of a turd in a punch bowl about it.
Yep, exactly.
What I always say is, I'm like, well, how about you listen and you tell me give me a well reasoned argument as to why, you
Oh,
know,
yeah,
and I'm like, because that's how critical thinking works. Is like don't just come in and say this is nonsense.
right.
You know, give me like use your critical thinking muscles, which a lot of us, and I'm guilty of it too. Sometimes our critical thinking muscles get a little atrophied over time. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? We fall into a groove, we get complacent, and we're not critical thinkers. We kind of do these knee jerk reactions. We don't, and I try to tell people is I'm like, regardless of what side you fall, let's try to present like a well-reasoned argument using the scientific method, using what we know about the world. And that's kind of my goal is I like being respectful to the Bigfoot community. I love that
Mhm.
they've been so welcoming to me, even because I was so dismissive of it for so long. And again, I changed my opinion. Like some people can't get over the fact that I changed my opinion, you know. But the that's kind of one of these that's sort of one of these things, it's kind of why I'm doing this is this also I think that dismissing all of this simply because it doesn't fit into the broader like scientific community's point of view is also counterproductive. You
Oh,
know what I
sure.
mean? So kind of removing some of that taboo, and I think that train's kind of left the station as far as getting like now. Now you don't have quite as much taboo as you would have, say, even in like the 90s. If you were a Bigfoot researcher on the weekends, you maybe didn't brag about it around the water cooler at work. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Now it's like
It's a cool thing.
it's a cool thing,
Yeah,
and so I think that like the taboo side of it, has kind of left the station. And I think we can thank technology for a lot of that, like people
mhm.
being more interconnected. So it is, I mean, there's just so much to unpack with it.
Oh, for sure.
um, and I'm still every day learning something new about it,
That's
every
awesome.
day. And yeah, and it is great. And occasionally somebody will ask me a question or tell me something that just really throws me. And I'm like, man, I don't know. The last webinar that I did, I wanted to do Sasquatch in indigenous cultures in North America.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Uh, and on its face, I'm like, I got this. I got this.
Mhm.
And I talked to our cultural resources person. He gave me so many great resources, you know. Uh, but the thing is any one of them you could write a thesis on,
I know it,
you
right?
know.
So
And like the day of the webinar, I was like, okay, hi folks. So this is the best I got because I want to do every one of these justice, but we don't have 18 hours to do, you know what I
yeah,
mean? And
totally.
I was like, because there was so much, and I was like, holy cow. And also, I'm not a linguist. I'm really, my Spanish is horrible. I'm really bad with
Mhm.
pronunciation when it comes to that, so like saying, I'm like, okay, I'm going to say this very slowly to try to get this
Right.
name right, but there's so much with that, like so much to research and so much to do that I really wanted to try to do it justice. And I feel like, I feel like I could keep revisiting that particular subject for the rest of my career, because there was so much to do with it. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a great thing. I wouldn't rather be doing anything else right
That
now.
there you
You
go.
know,
If you love
like
what you do and you
I
get to
do.
see
This is,
Bigfoot, then
I
that's it.
never, yeah, right. And the way I look at it is, one day I'm going to need replaced.
Mm.
Now I got into this field because, well, like Steve Irwin, I got into this field. I grew up watching the Crocodile Hunter,
Oh, yeah.
so I wanted to be one of those guys. I wanted to go out and catch snakes and turtles and stuff, and I wanted to educate, like, be passionate and share my passion with the world. Uh, and that's why I got into the education side of this was because
Mm.
um, if I convince someone to be, if not convince, if I inspire someone to become a naturalist
Yeah.
because of Bigfoot, so be it. You know what I mean? If they are passionate about it and they want to pursue this and they want to teach people about this, if they want to become a naturalist or a conservationist or anything like that because of, a Bigfoot hike they went on when they were 12, that's a win. That's a win on all fronts. You know what I mean? They're I'm passing the torch on to somebody that's gonna,
There you
keep
go.
all of the so that, that's why I do it, because that's what matters. That is like igniting that passion for the natural world. That's what matters. And Bigfoot's one of those things. Whether you like, I approach it as part of the natural world. It's not something we can go out and like, oh yeah, it's Bigfoot season, I can go out and call it. You know what I mean? But
Unless it's in
it's
Oklahoma, right?
right, unless it's right.
In
Right.
many ways.
Oh, thank goodness we've never done anything like that. That'd be
Thank
awful.
goodness.
Oh my god. Yeah, I always forget about Oklahoma, and then
I
somebody
know
will bring it up, and I'm like,
it.
oh
Yeah.
yeah. Like what a nightmare. But yeah. So anything else you
John,
want
in
to?
the last few minutes, so I know you're a guy you kind of keep under the radar, which is cool. So I usually ask, guests like, how do people follow you? But I think I
Oh
might want to ask, how do people keep in touch with what's going on at Salt Fork and
yeah.
all the Bigfoot stuff there?
Right. It's not so much that I intentionally keep under the radar. I'm just really
Oh yeah,
like a lot of times, a lot of times I'm like, no one wants to see a picture of this. You know what I mean? Like, no one wants to see what I'm eating. So I never post anything. And my wife does a good job of posting all of our kids and stuff. So it's,
there you go.
like all of my relatives get to see our kids on
There
my
you
wife's profile. So I
go.
never post anything. It's not so much like I just don't have much of a presence out of like laziness,
Right.
and like that's um I think this shirt might actually be my first official Instagram post. Maybe I'll do a
Yeah, there you
selfie
go.
and
All right,
add
that'd
it.
be
This will
cool.
be like I'll
Yeah,
I'll
dude.
I'll do it. Yeah.
All right.
But because
That's
I
cool.
right now I have no posts. It looks like a bot, like a bot account with
Yeah,
a
there you go.
mustache. But yeah. So to keep track of things that are going on with the Salt Fork, that's it's not just Bigfoot stuff either. Like if you want to find
Yep.
out anything that's going on, the best way is through Salt Fork's Facebook page.
Okay.
That's Salt Fork State Park. That's the like
Gotcha.
that not the lodge, because we do have a lodge. I mean, you can follow the lodge too
Hmm.
by all means, but Salt Fork State Park has its Facebook page. All that gets updated pretty regularly with all of my programs and stuff like that. Oh,
Yep.
excuse me.
You're good.
All of my all my program flyers and things get posted on there. A lot of the links, if I do a webinar or something, all the Bigfoot stuff, a lot of those links get posted on there too.
Nice.
So that's
Oh, that's awesome, actually.
also, I mean, if you happen to find me on Instagram, feel free to follow me. And some people do. I'll get a message once in a while. Is this the John Hickenbottom from Salt Fork?
Heck yes.
On my personal page. So you're more than welcome to do that. I'm not
Oh, that's awesome.
like I said, I'm under the radar like unintentionally. It's just that
Right, right.
sometimes I'm like, nobody wants to see this. Like, um, so so yeah, that's kind of the best way is our Facebook page. I mean, stuff gets posted on the official ODNR like calendar of events and things too.
Okay.
But it's sometimes kind of hard to find because we've got Ohio is we've got this abundance of state parks. Like I don't know that folks that live here grasp just how
Mm,
awesome our park system is. Like at least state park system. I mean, and virtually every county has a great metro park system too. But our state park system is like one of the best in the country. We have 75 state parks. And for a state the size of Ohio, I mean, we've only got 88 counties. So,
sure.
we have 75 state parks there, and you can basically get any sort of diversity you want in Ohio, as far as natural resources goes. So sometimes our calendar of events, we have so many state parks, it's kind of hard to find. So Saltfork's Facebook page, going to be your best
Nice.
bet for keeping track of that stuff.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for coming on tonight. It has been a pleasure chatting with you and finding out all about Salt Fork. And man, have to catch up with you sometime in the future. We're gonna so thank you again so much for coming
You're
on.
welcome. Thanks.
We're gonna transition over to the after show. So if you're listening to this on YouTube or podcast, this has already happened. But if you want to be in future after shows where you can talk to the guests, that you can go to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society, help support the podcast, and also be involved with those cool after shows. But we're going to go ahead and do that. But thanks again for coming on, John.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Bigfoot Society podcast. Please take a few minutes to review the show on iTunes, 5 stars, as it does help us get into the eyes and ears of more listeners on iTunes. That will help us just get bigger and bigger and get even better quality guests for future shows. Also, if you have any Bigfoot encounters or cryptid encounters, please send your stories and audio and photos, whatever you've got, over to bigfootsociety@gmail.com. If you'd like to become more involved with Bigfoot Society and get some extra content, we do have a Patreon where you can get all sorts of cool things. For example, for $7 a month, you get extra Bigfoot Society content, usually interviews, but other things as well. You get a sweet membership card and a vinyl sticker that I send to you in the mail. You get access to the Bigfoot Society after show, which is an extra interview after the main interview with the weekly guest, and usually they are up for Patreon members to be in that extra show segment with them and me, and you get to ask your question live to them and get an answer from the guest, which, as you've seen what guest we've had in the past, this could be a really big deal. There's also a private Discord where you can get involved with talking to me one-on-one and the community there, and that's always a great time. You can find the Patreon at www.patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. We're very thankful for all our supporters that we have in so many different ways, and appreciate all our listeners coming back week after week to listen to more cryptozoology-based interviews. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. The views and opinions expressed are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Bigfoot Society. Any content provided by our guests are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone. Thank you.